Welcome to Women of the World, a show which gives a voice to women from around the world who have chosen to make the United States their home. Our show believes in the principles written on and enshrined by the Statue of Liberty. Here's today's moderator, Gloria Van Demeltrot.
Hello, and welcome to Women of the World. I'm Gloria Van Demeltrot, and I'll be your moderator today. We're very excited to have a wonderful guest, Makena, who is author of a new book, Parenting Children into Wholeness, which sounds very exciting. Our co-hosts today are Dawn Tomlinson. Welcome, Dawn.
Well, thank you. I'm very excited about this topic because I have children as well.
Wonderful. Glad to have you here.
Thanks.
And we have Ty Goodwin. Welcome, Ty.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here as well. I can't wait for the conversation.
This is great. And now that brings us to our guest, Makena. We're delighted to have you with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Wonderful. Tell us about your book. Can you tell us about, this is a wonderful topic, and I think all of us have children here, so we can certainly relate, and we're excited to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, so basically starting with the title, Parenting Children into Wholeness, wholeness is huge, and without being whole, you cannot find satisfaction in life. So that's my springboard of this book, is reaching that wholeness in order to find satisfaction as we live our life.
I think that's something we all want for our children, but we don't know always how to get there. So I haven't had a chance to read your book yet, but I did go through it a little, and I'm deeply impressed with how well it's organized and some of the topics you're covering. I'm looking forward to hearing about it.
Can you tell us how you came about to write this book, and what was your impetus? What caused you to want to get this into the world?
So what inspired this book is, I would say, two things. Number one is just raising my own children and amidst of adversity. I have been married, divorced, a single mom. I have raised a child with severe medical condition. And in the midst of all this, I learned a lot of things. And the other thing is just watching life and seeing the difficulties that face parents and children, especially in today's world. And just to put my mind into what can I do for this situation. Not that I'm a superhero, because we are all learning and growing, but it just made me feel that I should put together some things and share them with parents. Some of the things that I have learned as a person. I was also a chaplain, a hospice chaplain for 10 years.
Wow.
Oh my.
And through that journey, I met many families, many parents during the end of life, as well as their parents. So I watched relationships. Some were very heartbreaking.
Yes.
And I tried to learn what happened. And I learned quite a few things from that environment as well. So it's putting this together. And the goal of my book is hopefully to help parents maximize the potential within their children, as well as develop those very lasting, forever relationships as they raise them and when they are adults. So.
Yeah.
That's great.
Well, I'm curious. So you talk about parenting children into wholeness. What does the opposite look like? So if you're not parenting them into wholeness, what are you doing to your children?
Good question.
Yeah, that's a very good question, because wholeness is brought about by being intentional. So a lot of times when we are not paying attention and being intentional about the things that we are putting in our children and how we are raising them, then we end up with regret, because when our children are not whole, they are not fully productive in their lives. And that doesn't bring them the joy that a parent wants to see in their children, especially as we get older and in those final stages of life. we want to look at our children and see that they are doing well.
Yes.
When our children are not doing well, we are heartbroken.
Yes.
So when we don't nurture the wholeness of our children, they don't end up being as productive as we hope for them to be. So basically, that's the other side of it, is
Absolutely.
that lack of productivity, lack of
Reaching their
satisfaction.
potential, the things that they're very good at, that they could expand on.
Exactly.
Do you deal with the impediments of the world? And one example, you talked about being a single parent. A single parent usually has to work, which takes a lot of time away.
Yes.
How do we deal with that? Do you deal with issues like that in your book to tell how to overcome and that sort of thing?
I do. I have spoken about that, and I was personally a single mom for several years. And part of those years that I was a single mother also, my son was really struggling medically. So I had a huge issues to deal with, from being a single mom, so having to work to provide, to trying to keep a job in the midst of constantly being in the hospital. So I went through that, and one of the things that I learned through that process is that all things are possible if we put our mind to it. And the biggest thing is priority. Putting the priorities out there. What is the most important thing?
It's so easy to lose track of that when you're just dealing with laundry and driving your car and getting an oil change. I mean, just those daily things take up so much of your mental capacity that there isn't a lot left to prioritize.
Yes, but in the midst of even the business, you can set up your priorities right.
Yes.
And without setting priorities, life just rolls.
Yes.
You know, time just goes. So as a single mom, what's the most important thing? And one of the things that I really emphasize in my book and with parents is spending time with your children.
Yeah.
It's huge. Nothing can replace the time that you spend with them, whether it's speaking with them, reading with them, just being there with them is something that is very overlooked. But no matter how much money we make, no matter what kind of gifts that we give to our children, they cannot replace the time that we spend with them. The aspect of spending time with our children gives us the ability. It's the springboard of everything else that you do around parenting. So having said that, then maintaining a job. And it's where you realize you have to work to provide. What does provision look like? What is enough to have so that you are leaving time? Are you competing with the neighbors and what other people are providing for their children? Or are you meeting your child's needs, keeping in mind that the most important thing is the time you spend with them? Because that also goes into relationship.
Absolutely.
Very important point. Very
Yeah.
important point.
You know, I'm so glad that you are putting a spotlight on single parents in a way that shows how single parents are great contributors to their children, and it can be a positive thing. I remember in the news, maybe in the last year or so, there were some articles saying that single parents were not good for children because there was something that they were missing in the home if you were a single parent. And I remember feeling some of that guilt because when I worked in corporate America, I worked in an office of 10 people. I was the only single parent in that environment. So can you talk a little bit about the best way to deal with that guilt of being a single parent and maybe some of the things that we should look out for so that we don't, like you say, overcompensate?
Absolutely. So single parents and all parents generally, this is for all parents. One of the things that I talk about and encourage parents to do is self-care, the being, the knowing who you are and owning that. No one else can do that for you, except yourself. So just the realization that because you are a single parent doesn't make you any less of a person. And it doesn't make you less productive. It doesn't make you less smart. So as a single parent, it's very possible to be extremely successful. Some of the married relationships can actually be not the best for children, especially where there's domestic violence and a lot of, so there are reasons why single parenting happens, and there are very valid reasons. As a single parent, it's important to own that and know that you are enough.
Yes.
Now, on the other hand, there is what I call the overcompensating, and that various parents can fall into that for various reasons, but especially single parents. When, as a single mom, I cannot be the dad for my child in the house. And so there's a tendency to feel that guilt. And so to try to overcompensate by giving gifts, by not disciplining, we feel like my child is suffering. Maybe they are getting bullied or being asked the difficult questions, and we feel bad for them, and we try to overcompensate to make their life more mushy so that they are not suffering too much. But that doesn't end up molding them into the image that we want them to be when they grow up. And so it's the realization that because I'm a single mom, I'm not gonna be a dad for my child. So what can I do to provide that dad figure or that male figure into my child's life, which is important. Having relationships with maybe uncles that are stable and can model the behaviors that you would like to see in your children, or friends. And having said that, it's not bringing the dates into your children's life, because that can be extremely damaging when you have a partner come into the life of your children, and then you don't get along and they leave. And you bring another one. That brings a lot of emotional damage to your children, because children trust very easily. So we have to be careful with that. The opposite person that you bring needs to be somebody that you can have in your life long term, like an uncle, like a grandfather, or a grandmother, if it's a male parent, single parent. So bringing those relationships that bring what you cannot provide.
So what you're saying is, again, being very intentional. And I like that theme of being an intentional parent and really thinking through the ramifications of whatever you do with your children. So in the case, like you say, of bringing a date, to think about how close are we to that significant other before we bring them into our child's life. And I really like that approach, because as an adoptee, I know that stable relationships are very important in a child's life. So I very much respect that approach. Thank you.
Absolutely. Stability is huge.
How do you approach someone, now another male figure like an uncle or a brother or someone, to play that role, with your children? I really like that concept and that idea, but how do you recommend to approach a person to do something like that?
You can speak to them or just build that relationship. I have a cousin here, and I also have a friend that I was raised with. Growing up, we grew up in the same village, and they both happened to be here in Minnesota. So in the years that I was a single parent, I was very intentional about building that relationship and inviting them over. So on my role, I made dinners and would invite my cousin Eric or my friend Duncan, and I would say, come over for dinner and come over. You know, it was constant inviting them over. And in the process, they ended up being very close to my son, and he looked up to them. And up to today, even after being remarried, we still have those relationships in our family. So there wasn't a time that we broke away from those relationships, and now my son had to go through the heartbreak of losing those relationships. So that's is thinking through and saying, who am I bringing and what is that relationship like? Because the more we can provide stability, stable relationships into our children's life, the better for them as
And
they
I
are
think you
growing
bring
up.
up
Whether it's a single parent or a full family.
Or full
having
family.
that
Absolutely.
relationship is so important.
It's very important.
And I
So
think that you bring up a good point that a male role model doesn't necessarily need to be someone that your child sees every single day. Stability can mean seeing somebody every month as long as it's consistent.
it's consistent.
Yeah, because you build that history through time and regular exposure rather than necessarily every day.
Right, and also bringing, even as a single parent, my children's godparents are an amazing couple.
Yeah.
And they've been very close to my life. When I came to United States and settled here in Minnesota, I met them in church, and they adopted me into their family. And even though they are not old enough to be my mom and dad, I call them mom and dad because spiritually they've raised me, adopted me also into their family,
Yeah.
and now they are my children's godparents. Strong African American couple, and so those raising my son, especially as a single mom, were a very big part of my life and still are. And in that, I found value in my son watching a stable marriage in them.
Yeah.
Wonderful
So,
example. A
yes.
wonderful example. And I understand that we have a video that we're going to insert into our show right now. Can you introduce that video and say something about it?
Yes, so that little video clip is my daughter, Sally Makena. She participates in National American Miss. National American Miss is a pageant for girls, and it's very different from the ordinary pageants because they focus on developing leadership in girls. Their focus is professionalism, leadership. And so, for example, my daughter, at her age, she's 8, she cannot wear makeup. They dress professionally, so no swimsuits. They are educating girls on how to dress for job interviews. They write resumes. They do interviews. So it's an amazing pageant. And so I found this for my daughter. She's very smart and very talented. And this year she did spokesmodel and was a 2 with a speech. And so she's going to California to represent the state of Minnesota.
Wonderful.
Oh, I can't wait to see this.
And
Wonderful.
so that's what the video is about. And while I say that, I also gotta say that Nate, my son that I was talking about, is also an author. He has written his own book, Miracles Still Happen. And recently he was interviewed. There's a magazine coming up. It's the Elle magazine. And Nate has been chosen as the author of the year 2017. So
wonderful.
I have the pleasure to see these 2 young children succeed. I also have a nephew who is my son legally. He is at the U of M in his final year, and he's doing computer engineering.
Wow.
So having said that, and the reason I bring that up, again, it's the intentionality. Is raising successful and happy children is not all about being out in the open, but it's more building them to be solid in who they are. And so while I'm helping them develop in their talents, my biggest focus in helping them be very solid in their identity. Who are you? And helping them to be happy just being children, just being a person and contributing to your community. So
Wonderful.
Okay,
well, let's watch the video now.
Next is junior preteen contestant from the state of Minnesota, 108. Slate, please.
Sally Makena.
Action in 3, 2, 1.
Last week, my mom was bragging that I am the good child. I always make straight A's, I don't talk back, and I always keep my room fresh and clean. What my mom doesn't know is that I have a secret weapon with my room is always so fresh and so clean. Always makes my room smell like a breath of fresh air.
And cut. And for your second take, action in 3, 2, 1.
Last week, my mom was bragging that I'm the good child. I always make straight A's, I don't talk back, and I always keep my room fresh and clean. What my mom doesn't know is that I have a secret weapon with my room is always so fresh and so clean. Always makes my room smell like a breath of fresh air.
And cut. Introducing number 10.
Let's continue our discussion and tell us more about creating a wholesome environment and for happy children.
Sure, I can speak to the environment too. So the environment that you create for your children is very important. Again, going back to being very intentional. I think the biggest word that I would use for parenting is being intentional. Being intentional about who you are as a parent and how you live your life. Because when it comes to even handling disappointments, handling the difficulties of life, how you deal with failure and disappointments is how you are training your children to deal with failure and disappointments.
Right. Yeah. Right.
So who you are, being very intentional about who you are as a person is very important to parenting role.
You know, in your book, I think you also talk about handling children or working with children with disabilities.
Yes.
Can you speak a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. So raising children with disability or severe medical condition, like my son has had 22 brain surgeries.
Wow.
He has fought severe battle with seizures. And just training them to accept those things about their life and especially training a positive view to life, handling it with grace, because when you get depressed about circumstances of your life, you can't overcome. But if you can learn to look at the bright side of even when you are suffering, there's a bright side to it. And there's something you can focus on and look at. For example, recently my son had an episode and my daughter was crying because she was heartbroken. And what my son said to her, 15-year-old, he said, Sari, don't cry. Look at how long God kept me without being sick. And it just, I just was like, wow, that is, you know, a 15-year-old.
Very inspiring.
Right, training them to be positive in spite of the adversity, because adversities do not define us.
That's true.
We can define ourselves in spite of the adversities. That's one thing. And also, the realization that just because a child has disability doesn't mean that they have nothing to offer. How can we turn that adversity into the good for our child and the other children that are facing the same adversities? And then the other thing that I would also like to mention quickly is in raising children with either disability or severe medical conditions, is it's very easy to focus on that child and forget that our other children have equal needs.
Yes,
And
very
so
important.
very important, because what ends up happening is then the other children start looking for ways to get attention from the parents, and also get very heartbroken because they are not grown enough to understand. So as a parent, you have to juggle it. It's your job as a parent to find that balance where you're giving attention very intentionally to the other children.
Yeah. Well, it's impressive hearing about your children, and is it your nephew?
My nephew, who is also
you're-
my son.
Yeah, they are showing what you've invested in them, you know, and so we know that you have kept a positive spirit and that you have really demonstrated that for them. My question is, if you're a parent and you don't feel like you're whole, what do you advise for them if they're trying to give that to their children when you don't feel whole yourself?
Wow, that just makes me smile because when I started writing this book, Parenting into Wholeness, at the middle of this book, I actually stopped and I put it aside and I wrote a book called Become Whole, Unbreakable, and Unstoppable. It's called, Become Whole, Unbreakable, and Unstoppable because I realized that I'm speaking to bringing wholeness to our children. And I realized, no, we can only bring wholeness to our children to the degree that we are whole.
Yeah.
Right.
And so I wrote that book. It's out there. And we can use that book among other books that we can read and build that wholeness in us so that
That's great.
Could you give us a simple explanation of wholeness? What do you mean by wholeness?
So wholeness, basically, it's being complete in who you are, where we know we are broken. So it's not being perfect, because no human being can be perfect. But it's
I read that in your book, and I was very impressed by that because we all think we're supposed to be perfect. So to understand that we don't need to be, and yet we can be whole.
you can be whole and not perfect. And part of being whole is knowing your weaknesses and being okay with those weaknesses or learning to manage them. So wholeness of the mind,
Excellent.
learning how to choose your thoughts, and the wholeness of your spirit, feeding into your spirit person, you are growing your emotions, getting healing for the parts of you that are broken, as well as your physical body, taking care of you physically, whether it's through nutrition. Sugar is really bad for us, and we tend to gravitate towards sugar.
We do.
And so the wholeness is brought by the spiritual aspect, the mental, the emotional, and the physical, all of it together.
Together, yeah.
Taking care of who you are as a whole person, as a complete person, is very important.
Anne Makena, that was a wonderful description of wholeness, and thank you for this delightful discussion. Our time has flown by, but it's now at an end. Thank you so much for being with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, my pleasure.
To our co-hosts, Dawn and Ty, thank you so much. Thank you for watching. To our viewers, we'll see you next time.